In November 1095, Pope Urban II addressed a council at Clermont and called on Latin Christians to march east to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. His words spread rapidly across Western Europe, and they reached knights, peasants, and church leaders who believed that fighting in the name of Christ would guarantee the forgiveness of sins. Over the next 4 years, thousands of armed pilgrims travelled across unfamiliar lands, endured starvation, defeated powerful armies, and committed mass killings, all while claiming to carry out God's will. By July 1099, they had seized Jerusalem, yet their victory created new states, inflamed religious conflict, and set the foundation for future wars between Latin Christendom and the Islamic world. On the 27th of November 1095, Pope Urban II stood before nobles and clergy in southern France and urged Christians to take up arms in defence of their faith. He claimed that Muslims had seized Jerusalem, attacked holy sites, and mistreated Christian pilgrims who travelled to the east. According to Fulcher of Chartres, who wrote several years later around 1100, Urban offered forgiveness of sins to those who joined the expedition, framing it as both an act of penance and a sacred duty. To increase urgency, Urban described alleged atrocities committed by the Seljuk Turks, many of which were likely exaggerated in later versions of the speech, and promised spiritual rewards to anyone who participated. Multiple versions of his speech circulated later, including accounts by Robert the Monk and Baldric of Dole, who repeated these details and added emotional appeals to encourage knights to abandon their violent rivalries at home and instead fight for God. The speech ended with cries of Deus vult, meaning God wills it, which quickly became the rallying cry of the movement. During the 11th century, Western Europe experienced a religious revival that encouraged a range of devotional practices, such as personal worship, acts of penance, and reverence for pilgrimages. Many Christians believed that suffering in the service of God could erase their sins, and the idea of holy war found support among church leaders who promoted a divine mission to protect sacred spaces. The Peace of God and Truce of God movements served as an earlier example for this form of religious warfare, and they had attempted to control knightly violence since the 10th century. At the same time, warfare between rival lords remained constant, and the Church struggled to reduce internal violence through such campaigns. Urban's message gave knights a way to pursue glory and salvation at the same time, while also allowing the papacy to assert control over both secular rulers and the Eastern churches. Against the backdrop of the investiture controversy, which was a power struggle between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire, this effort to lead an international religious war allowed the Pope to increase his authority across Europe. For many nobles, the crusade offered a rare chance to secure land, titles, and reputation outside the rigid hierarchies of feudal society. After suffering defeat at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the Byzantine Empire lost control of most of Anatolia to Turkish forces. The Seljuk Turks, who established the Sultanate of Rum, captured key cities and carved out their own sultanate based at Nicaea. By the 1090s, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos faced growing pressure on multiple fronts, including Norman raiders in the west and Pecheneg invasions along the Danube. Hoping to reclaim lost territory, Alexios requested aid from the west. He expected small groups of professional mercenaries rather than a mass movement of foreign soldiers who were answering a religious summons. As the Crusader armies arrived in waves, Byzantine officials attempted to manage them with supplies and guides, although suspicion and tension developed quickly. Alexios demanded oaths of loyalty and expected the return of former Byzantine lands, but Crusader leaders held different priorities and often viewed their hosts as unreliable. Early in 1096, before the arrival of the main forces, an untrained crowd of peasants, monks, and minor nobles set off under the leadership of Peter the Hermit. They marched through the Rhineland, where they attacked Jewish communities in cities like Mainz and Worms, killing thousands. Count Emicho of Flonheim emerged as one of the most notorious leaders of these massacres, though he was not formally part of Peter's movement. Jewish chroniclers such as Solomon Bar Simpson and the Mainz Anonymous later recorded the horror of these attacks in vivid detail. Their lack of discipline, organisation and supplies made them a liability long before reaching the Holy Land. Soon after entering Byzantine territory, the group caused unrest and alarm in Constantinople. Emperor Alexios had them ferried across the Bosporus and sent into Anatolia, where they were ambushed and slaughtered by Turkish forces near Sivertod in October. The defeat ended the People's Crusade and exposed the dangers of religious enthusiasm unaccompanied by planning, coordination, or military skill. Later in 1096, 4 major armies assembled under the command of experienced nobles. Godfrey of Bouillon led a force from the Holy Roman Empire, while Raymond IV of Toulouse brought the largest army from southern France. Bohemond of Taranto, who was a Norman from southern Italy, and Hugh of Vermandois, the brother of the French king, led 2 other groups. Other commanders included Tancred the Marquis, the Duke of Normandy Robert Curthose, and Stephen of Blois. Although they shared a common goal, the Crusader leaders acted independently, often pursuing separate interests. Upon arrival in Constantinople, most agreed to swear loyalty to Alexios and return captured Byzantine cities. In practice, they only followed these terms when convenient. The leaders viewed themselves as holy warriors, rather than imperial subjects, and they resented any attempt to limit their authority or claim their conquests. Once the Crusaders crossed into Anatolia, they faced long marches, hostile forces, and unfamiliar terrain. Byzantine guides provided intelligence and advice, although cooperation between the 2 groups remained uneasy. Crusaders suffered from shortages of food and water, and sometimes received supplies from allied towns. Still, their early victories increased morale and strengthened the belief that divine support guided the campaign. As they moved from city to city, the Crusaders gradually advanced through Anatolia and prepared for battles that would test their endurance, leadership, and coordination under pressure. In May 1097, the Crusaders reached Nicaea, a fortified city that had once belonged to the Byzantine Empire, but now served as the Seljuk capital. Kilij Arslan had marched east to confront rivals among the Danish Mendids, and left the city poorly defended because he believed the Crusader threat to be minor. Once he realized the size of the invading force, he returned and launched an attack, but the Crusaders repelled him after fierce fighting. To surround the city, the Crusaders coordinated with Byzantine ships that blocked Lake Ascanios and cut off supplies. Manuel Botoumitis, a trusted official, secretly negotiated the city's surrender with the defenders. On the 19th of June, the city surrendered to the Byzantines, who took control and prevented the Crusaders from looting. Many felt betrayed, although the outcome allowed the expedition to continue with a secure route behind them. On the 1st of July 1097, Bohemond's advance force was attacked near Dorylaeum by Turkish horse archers. Surrounded and under pressure, his troops formed defensive positions and waited for reinforcements. Later that day, the arrival of Raymond, Godfrey, and others turned the tide. They launched a counterattack, scattered the Turkish cavalry, and won the field. The battle revealed both the dangers of open combat and the strength of coordinated Crusader forces. Although the Turks used superior mobility and archery, they could not withstand continuous charges by trained foot soldiers and armoured horsemen. After the battle, the Crusaders moved through central Anatolia with less resistance. In October 1097, the Crusaders reached Antioch, one of the largest and best defended cities in the region. The siege lasted nearly 8 months and brought extreme hardship. Food ran out, disease spread, and desertions increased. At one point, morale fell so low that even some leaders considered abandoning the campaign. Eventually, Bohemond arranged for a betrayal from within the city. A guard named Firuz opened a gate on the 3rd of June 1098, and Crusader forces entered and took control after bloody fighting. However, they soon found themselves under siege when Kerboga of Mosul arrived with a relief army. The defenders, weakened and outnumbered, looked for a miracle. On the 14th of June, a priest named Peter Bartholomew claimed to discover the Holy Lance buried beneath the Church of St. Peter. Although some leaders doubted its authenticity, many saw it as a sign of divine favour. Days later, the Crusaders launched a desperate attack and drove Kerboga's forces into retreat. Bohemond refused to hand the city to the Byzantines and instead declared himself Prince of Antioch, violating his oath. This decision contributed to a permanent rift between Latin and Greek Christians in the region. By June 1099, the Crusaders reached Jerusalem, now under Fatimid control. The journey south had weakened their numbers, but they pressed on. Without proper siege equipment, they transported timber from the port of Jaffa and felled trees to build towers and ladders. They also faced extreme heat and water shortages as they prepared for an assault. On the 15th of July, they launched a two-pronged attack. One group breached the northern wall, while another broke through near Mount Zion. Once inside, the Crusaders slaughtered the inhabitants, including Muslims and Jews, regardless of age or gender. Eyewitnesses such as Raymond of Aguilas and the anonymous author of the Gesta Francorum described horrific scenes of bloodshed and widespread killing. Although Tancred offered protection to some civilians who sought refuge, he was unable to prevent the general massacre. After the bloodshed ended, Godfrey entered the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and gave thanks. He refused the title of king out of reverence for Christ, declaring he would not wear a crown where Christ had worn a crown of thorns, and instead became defender of the Holy Sepulchre. His brother Baldwin, who arrived soon after, would take the crown the following year and rule as the first king of Jerusalem. After their victory, the Crusaders carved out several Latin Christian states in the eastern Mediterranean. The county of Edessa and the Principality of Antioch were established in 1098, followed by the Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1099 and the county of Tripoli in 1109. The Kingdom of Jerusalem became the central authority, although Antioch and Tripoli often acted independently and resisted its influence. Each relied on strong fortifications, military orders, and periodic support from Europe. Feudal structures were imported from the west, and fortified castles such as Crac des Chevaliers helped secure these gains. The Knights Hospitaller, which had operated as a charitable group during the First Crusade, later adopted military functions. In 1119, the Knights Templar was founded to protect pilgrims and reinforce Christian control. The First Crusade left deep scars across the Islamic world. The massacre at Jerusalem became a symbol of Christian cruelty and was remembered in Muslim chronicles for generations. Historians such as Ibn al-Athir described the invasion as both a human and spiritual catastrophe. The violence reinforced the belief that the Franks, as the Crusaders were called, posed a threat not only to land but also to faith. Among Christians, the victory inspired confidence and reinforced the idea of divine justice. However, many leaders recognized the instability of the Crusader states and the moral cost of their actions. The conflict introduced lasting hostility between Christian and Muslim communities, which worsened with each new expedition. Across Latin Christendom, the success of the Crusade was celebrated in churches, monasteries, and royal courts. The papacy gained status, and many believed that divine intervention had guided the army. Preachers soon called for new expeditions to reinforce the Holy Land and expand its territory. Within the Islamic world, initial responses were uncoordinated, as rival dynasties continued to fight one another. Over time, leaders such as Zengi, Nur al-Din, and eventually Saladin began to organize resistance and reclaim lost cities. Their rise would fuel later conflicts, and the fragile Crusader kingdoms would remain under siege for decades. The First Crusade achieved what no later campaign could, the capture of Jerusalem by force. Yet it also introduced cycles of violence that bred deep mistrust and sustained demands for vengeance that shaped Christian-Muslim relations for centuries to come. I hope that you have enjoyed learning about the First Crusade. If you would like to discover more, be sure to check out the free resources on the History Skills website. I look forward to seeing you again on our next video.